The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Hello everyone, I'm Prudence Fallon. I'm the Adult Services and Programming and Reference Librarian for Tiverton Public Library, and I'm so happy that you're all here.
The Curse, big-time gambling seduction of a small New England town. The book is a novel. It's set against the explosion of casino gambling in Connecticut back in the 1990s, when two Indian tribes built the world's two biggest casinos in the southeastern corner of our state. The story begins back in the 1600s, when the Connecticut colonists, living up and down the Connecticut River from Windsor down to Saybrook, got together with their Mohegan allies and defeated and almost destroyed the Pequots, who at the time were the largest and the most warlike of the Connecticut tribes. The story then jumps some 350 years as these two tribes, the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans, reemerge almost miraculously, thanks to Congress and the courts, to build these two enormous enterprises, the world's two biggest casinos in southeastern Connecticut. And in the story, a fictional Connecticut family becomes embroiled in a battle to stop a third casino that threatens the family's town and ancestral home. So in the end, the story is really a Faustian tale about a small, quintessential New England town faced with a dilemma, whether or not to try to preserve its character and its values on the one hand, or accept an enormously seductive and potentially lucrative offer that would change the town forever. Since you face a situation not unlike that right here in Tiverton, I thought that this evening what I would do, instead of talking as much about the book, is talk about the background to the book, about what happened and what has happened in Connecticut. And before I do that, talk about the background, I should probably give you just a little bit more of my own background, since it figured in to the book. And I represented eastern Connecticut, almost all the towns east of the Connecticut River, in Congress during the 1970s. I then left Congress to run for governor. I was a nominee for governor of Connecticut, and I lost the election. At that point, I left politics, and my family, my wife and our 4 children, moved from Vernon, Connecticut, near Hartford, down to Ledyard, Connecticut, long before anyone dreamed of casinos coming to the state of Connecticut. And those two experiences, knowing the political backdrop of Connecticut as intimately as I did, and then living in the midst of the subsequent casino explosion, gave me a front row seat for watching the political maneuverings that led to the casinos and then seeing their impact firsthand. Indian casinos got their start back in 1988, just about 25 years ago, a little more than 25 years ago, when Congress passed something called the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which was meant to help poor, federally recognized Indian tribes build casinos on their reservations in order to raise money to support their tribal governments. It'd be fair to say, however, that Congress had absolutely no idea of the Pandora's box it was opening when it passed this law. Because the law, as it turned out, not only opened the door to Indian casinos, but it spurred the legalization and the opening of non-Indian, commercially owned casinos across the United States as well. Back in 1988, when this law was passed, there were only 2 states that allowed casinos. Nevada, obviously with Las Vegas, and New Jersey with Atlantic City. Today, 40 states have casinos, and America is literally awash in casinos. We now have almost 1,000 of them, just about equally divided between Indian and commercially owned casinos. And as a result, casino gambling has literally become America's new national pastime. With more people going to casinos today in the United States than to professional baseball, football, basketball, hockey, soccer, and you can throw in any other professional sport you're aware of combined. That's how big it has become. But nowhere did it become bigger, faster than in your neighboring state and my state of Connecticut. Foxwoods opened back in 1992, opened by the Mashantucket Pequots in Ledyard, and Mohegan Sun, run by the Mohegan Nation, opened in 1996, 7.5 miles away in the town of Ottville. They were the first casinos in the entire Northeast outside of Atlantic City, and with virtually no other competition. They quickly became the two biggest casinos in the world. Not in the United States, not in the Western Hemisphere, but on the entire planet. They began right off the bat by drawing over half their customers from out of state, mainly Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island, but from all over the Northeast. They initially created 23,000 casino jobs, and they began sending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to the state treasury in Hartford in shared slot revenue. It's truly one of the most amazing stories in the history of New England. These two tribes, the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans, once mortal enemies trying to destroy each other, and then gradually fading away for hundreds of years after the Pequot War, until there's almost no more Indian blood left, almost no more Indian culture left, and yet re-emerging thanks to our political system to build these enterprises. Great story, right? Except, of course, the story is not over. Once and again, it's front page headlines in Connecticut and in many states across the country. It's not over because with each passing year, we're learning more and more about the downside of what has happened in Connecticut. For starters, the casinos have created a pervasive gambling culture in southeastern Connecticut. They've skewed the region's economy heavily toward low-paying service jobs, and they were followed by a steep increase in the number of Connecticut residents seeking treatment for gambling addiction. One of the most remarkable findings from a 2009 State of Connecticut study was that there had been a 400% increase in the number of arrests for embezzlement in Connecticut after the casinos opened, a rate of increase 10 times the national average. One of the embezzlers, incidentally, was my tax collector in Ledyard. She managed to steal $302,000 from tax receipts. I never knew whether mine were among them or not, but I always assumed they probably were, in order to play the slots at Foxwoods. And of course, she didn't win, because over time, virtually nobody wins. It is statistically impossible, almost, to win when the casino takes roughly 10% of everything you bet. In any event, she didn't win. In fact, the number of arrests for embezzlement in southeastern Connecticut has been so great that the New London Day, our largest newspaper, has described southeastern Connecticut as the embezzlement capital of America. You probably didn't know you lived that close to the embezzlement capital of America. Recent embezzlement stories, and we have them all the time, but they're not even much news anymore. Recent embezzlement stories in Connecticut range from a Bridgeport elementary school principal charged with taking $10,000 from student funds in order to play at the casinos to the chief financial officer of the little town of Winchester, Connecticut, up in the northwestern corner of Connecticut in Litchfield County. There, the chief financial officer, over a period of 5 years, and we use 5 years only because the law enforcement wasn't able to go back beyond that to check the records. Over a period of 5 years, the chief financial officer managed to steal over $2 million from the town. An embezzlement so great that it brought the little town of Winchester almost to its knees. Right up to Christmas, it was talking about having to close the school system in Winchester because they had run out of money. Eventually, they did not have to do it, but that was the debate. Looking at crime overall, a new 2014 study from Western Connecticut State University shows that the number of violent crimes, including murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, increased in those 11 towns around the casinos after the casinos opened, despite a sharp drop in violent crime nationally and in Connecticut as a whole. And while the number of theft crimes in those towns decreased modestly, the value of property stolen skyrocketed by nearly 40%. According to the study's author, interviews with local police and judicial officials also indicated increases in crimes such as prostitution and illicit drug use. Now, as far back as 1997, so that's a pretty long time ago, 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago, Congress, which had opened the door to this gambling explosion, became so concerned about what it had done that it set up a national commission along with the president to study the issue. Based on its findings, the commission recommended that there be a moratorium on the building of new casinos in the United States until the government could get a better handle on their social and economic costs. But the recommendation was never implemented, and I suggested the number of casinos has continued to multiply as state after state has invited casinos in order to get a piece of the revenue without having to overtly or openly raise taxes. In the process, the casino gambling industry has become a $67 billion industry. And that doesn't count entertainment, it doesn't count restaurants, it doesn't count hotels, it's just gambling revenue. $67 billion industry. And the casino industry has become one of the most powerful industries in the United States. The industry contends, and I know I don't have to tell you this because you're reading this in your local papers now, you're so close to Massachusetts, everybody read it for months and months and months as Massachusetts was debating whether or not to repeal its casino law. But the casino industry contends that casinos spur economic development, that they create jobs, and that they provide states and municipalities with much needed revenue. Opponents, however, have long argued that casinos do far more harm than good. They begin with the facts that gambling, after all, is addictive for millions of people, and that gambling addiction leads to debt, bankruptcies, broken families, and crime. Second, opponents reject the contention that casinos promote economic development. Pretty important, because that's the biggest argument of all for bringing a casino in. They point out that the jobs and the revenue a casino produces are funded by the gambling losses of its customers, leaving those individuals with less money to spend on other goods and services, and resulting in what Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Samuelson, one of our greatest economists, called, quote, the sterile transfer of money from one group to another without creating any new value. And of course, that transfer takes place in 99% of the cases from less wealthy people to more wealthy people. In Connecticut, moreover, critics note, the casinos have done little to create spin-off businesses, but have cannibalized other businesses. One example of cannibalization actually involves a very good friend of mine. He owned and operated one of the most successful restaurants in southeastern Connecticut. And I remember very well how excited he was the day Mohegan Sun opened a few miles up the street. And I remember him telling me how sure he was that with all these people coming down from Boston and over from Providence and over from Albany and up from New York City, surely hundreds of these people would stop at his restaurant every single week in order maybe to have lunch before they went to gamble, maybe to have dinner on the way home. Maybe some of these 23,000 employees would come on over at the end of a tough shift, come on over and have a drink at the bar, or maybe they'd have a bite to eat. It took about 32 months for him to close his restaurant. And I'll also never forget what he told me the night he told me he was going to close it, because I couldn't believe it. His restaurant had been so successful. He told me, you know, Bob, he said, I cannot believe how naive I have been about the way the casinos work. But now I understand. People drive to the casinos, they play at the casinos, they go to shows at the casinos, they eat at the casino restaurants, they stay at the casino hotels, and then they fill up their gas tanks at the casino gas stations, and they drive home. We, as local merchants, rarely, if ever, see any of these people. Unless, of course, they break down on the road and needs a little bit of help. Steve Wynn. You're all familiar with Steve Wynn, the great casino mogul who's building a casino up in Boston, in Everett. Steve Wynn tried to open casinos in both Bridgeport and Hartford, Connecticut. He was rebuffed on both scores at that time by the Connecticut legislature in the early 1990s. But when he was trying to do that, he met with a group of business people in Bridgeport, and like a group like this. And one of them asked the question about what they could expect as far as spin-off businesses coming to their businesses because of the proposed casino in Bridgeport. And Wynn, who, if nothing else, is a very, very direct and blunt person, looked out over the audience and said, get it straight. There is no reason on earth for any of you to expect for more than 1 second that just because people come to my casino, they're going to run into your store or restaurant. Second, opponents reject the contention that casinos promote, as I said, economic growth. And third, opponents say there's very little evidence that casinos ultimately strengthen a state's or a town's or a municipality's finances. Connecticut, they note, receives 25% of Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun's profits, slot profits, which has provided the state of Connecticut with almost $7 billion over the last 22 years. Almost $7 billion going to the state treasury in Connecticut over the last 22 years from shared slot revenue. Yet today, Connecticut is in the worst financial shape in its history, with a lagging economy and the third worst debt and unfunded liabilities of any state in the United States. And now, an independent group of scholars assembled by the nonpartisan, non-political Institute for American Values in New York, one of the country's leading think tanks, has published a landmark report that looks at the impact the casino explosion has had on the nation as a whole. I thought you'd be interested in its findings. 1, the new regional and local casinos, like the one they want to build here in Tiverton, are different from traditional Vegas-style casinos, resort casinos, that catered predominantly to well-heeled players who came from long distances away and preferred table games. In contrast, the new casinos are primarily filled with a whole new generation of rapid play, highly addictive slot machines that cater overwhelmingly to middle and low rollers who live nearby, return frequently, and play the slots. Indeed, according to the research, the latest research that talks about what the situation was in the United States when somebody got on a plane and flew maybe once or twice a year to Las Vegas to gamble, if he or she happened to like to gamble, versus what the situation is now across the United States, where local players will go to slot parlors, slot casinos, as many as 150, even 200 times a year, instead of once or twice a year. 2, slot machines depend on problem gamblers. That is, people with some level of gambling addiction, whether they be pathological gamblers or so-called problem gamblers, for anywhere between 35 and 60% of their profits. Just amazing. There are now 11 studies in the last 10 years which show those statistics to be true. The very basic business model of the casino is to prey on people vulnerable to gambling addiction. So when you ask the casino people when they come to town, what is your business? Well, my business is entertainment, or my business is. Their business is preying on addicted people for about half their overall profits. 3, living within 10 miles of a casino doubles the chance of developing a gambling addiction. 4, casinos constitute a regressive tax that hits low-wage earners, minorities, and the elderly the hardest, thereby contributing to economic inequality in America. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have got a new name for casinos. It's daycare for the elderly, because of the number of older people who, well, just go to a casino, walk down the aisles, see who's playing the slot machines. Casinos represent a regressive tax that hits these people the hardest: low-wage earners, minorities, and the elderly, thereby contributing to economic inequality in America. Where have you heard that term before? The new mantra of both the Democratic and Republican parties is so concerned about economic inequality in America. And incidentally, according to the research, the new face of problem gambling in America is a woman aged 50 to 85, who may have lost contact with some of her family, or may be a widow, may be divorced, maybe have an estrangement with her children, and who is looking for something to do. Senior women, according to the research, are especially drawn to slot machines because of the ability to gamble in isolation. Slot machines are all about you and the machine. It has nothing to do with socialization, but you and the machine. Women especially like the security, excellent security in casinos, at least until you walk out into the parking lot. And women also like the hospitality. Nobody is nicer to senior citizens, and especially senior women, than the casinos. Free glasses of wine, comped lunches or low-cost lunches, subsidized bus tours, all kinds of correspondence from the casino inviting you to come in, especially at Social Security time. 5, state sponsorship of gambling is a conflict of interest for state governments that are established to promote the general welfare, not prey on their citizens by encouraging them to lose their money. This all from the study from the Institute for American Values. In sum, according to this study, the new regional and local casinos drain wealth from communities, weaken nearby businesses, hurt property values, and reduce civic participation, family stability, and other forms of social capital that are at the heart of a successful community like Tiverton. Now, despite the costs, the conventional wisdom in Connecticut has been that Connecticut's casinos have been a net economic plus for the state of Connecticut in the past because of their success in attracting such a large number of out-of-state people who come into Connecticut, play at the casinos, and leave their money in Connecticut and take their problems home with them. But the regional monopoly that allowed Connecticut's casinos to attract all these people from out of state has been disappearing steadily now for the last 7 years, as more and more out-of-staters stop visiting Connecticut and because they have casinos in their own backyard. As a result, Connecticut's casinos are having to increasingly depend, as you would expect, on local people to come in and gamble in order to keep their profits up, which simply redistributes money within the state without creating any new economic value for Connecticut. In fact, once the social costs are factored in, economist Earl Grinnell's, the country's leading independent expert on the subject, concludes that the cost-to-benefit ratio of bringing a casino into a new community that will really essentially just redistribute the money, is greater than 3 to 1. That the long-term costs are greater by a factor of 3 to 1 than the benefits. And of course, the number of casinos continues to grow. When Foxwoods opened back in 1992, there were only 10 other casinos in the entire 12 states of the Northeast, all in Atlantic City, 250 miles away. Today, there are 57 casinos in the Northeast, soon to be over 70 casinos in the 12 states of the Northeast, based on those already approved and those under consideration. Thanks to the growing competition, the combined revenue for Connecticut's 2 casinos is now down 38% from its peak, and the competition has just begun. The Connecticut casinos have now eliminated 8,000 workers and have been increasingly replacing full-time jobs with part-time jobs in order to reduce wage costs and eliminate medical benefits, while Foxwoods has stopped all profit sharing with its tribal owners and is mired in debt. The story is similar elsewhere, with increasing cross-border competition cutting into the profits of casinos in more and more states. Delaware has now put millions of dollars toward trying to bail out its 3 casinos, while New Jersey has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up its casinos, only to see a third of them close in the last 20 months. And it's rumored another one is about to close before the end of the year. Now, at this point, you just might think that states would begin to recognize the short-sightedness of depending on casino revenue. But that, of course, would be too much to ask, and it's not what is happening. Instead, state after state has become so hooked on the gambling money that it is seeking to expand gambling, either to increase gambling revenue or replace the gambling revenue it is losing to cross-border competition. In Connecticut, the state began by increasing Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun's free play allowance so they could attract more customers and beef up their promotions. The state, as I said, has legalized the casino game Keno for restaurants, bars, and taverns. And now the state legislature, just in the last few months, has passed a new bill creating a process for allowing the 2 tribes to jointly open the first of what could be 3 new commercial casinos meant to defend against Massachusetts and New York. But as troubling as the situation in Connecticut is, the downward spiral into more gambling is even more problematic in many ways in your own state of Rhode Island. The state of Rhode Island already relies on gambling revenue from the lottery and casinos for roughly 11% of its general revenue budget, which means gambling is Rhode Island's 3rd largest revenue source. As a result, Rhode Island's general revenue budget is 3.5 times more dependent on gambling than are we in Connecticut. And based on the latest available research, Rhode Island may well get more revenue per capita from gambling than any other state in the country, including Nevada. And now, after bailing out Twin River Casino in 2010, Rhode Island's political leaders want to further increase the state's dependence on gambling by putting a full-scale casino here in Tiverton. As in Connecticut, the casino advocates contend that casino expansion is necessary to protect the state's revenue and the state's jobs. A Tiverton casino, they argue, would help keep Rhode Island's gamblers from going to Massachusetts, would bolster the state's finances, would create additional jobs, and provide Tiverton itself with $4 million a year in revenue, according to the last things that I've read. On the surface, it's a hard argument to resist, especially when the casino's promoters have the money to run a highly professional publicity campaign designed to dominate the public debate. As my understanding is that Twin Rivers management has already held one large-scale public meeting, and it says it has so far met with some 800 people in 32 small sessions in people's homes and restaurants here in town. In Massachusetts last year, the casino industry reportedly ran 4,000 television advertisements in the final month of the statewide casino referendum there, while the casino opponents were unable to run any because they had no money and were not well organized. In Brockton, Massachusetts, earlier this year in July, the casino developer there, Rush Street Gaming, is reported to have outspent a coalition of civic groups, churches, and other casino opponents by 450 to 1 to win a narrow victory in Brockton. Clearly, many local residents are against the proposed casino for traffic, environmental, and other locally specific reasons. But here are some additional specific considerations that you can be sure the Tiverton casino promoters would prefer not to talk about. First, while a Tiverton casino would presumably be initially successful, and they're all initially successful. They're new, they're glitzy, they're exciting to some people, they're all initially successful. And it would undoubtedly keep some Rhode Island gamblers in state. But it would also create large numbers of new Rhode Island gamblers, because convenience is everything today to a casino's success. And it would encourage current gamblers in the area to gamble more frequently because of the convenience, adding to the state's longer-term social and economic problems. Second, increasing Rhode Island's dependence on gambling revenue would set the state up for an even bigger budget crisis when Massachusetts finally opens major casinos in Boston and in Brockton or Taunton and begins attracting large numbers of Rhode Island customers and further reducing the flow of Massachusetts customers to Rhode Island. And third, is there anyone at all in this room who thinks that opening the proposed casino would end the pressure for continuing gambling expansion in Rhode Island? Even a quick look at what is happening in other casino states and at the federal level suggests that is highly unlikely. Video slots, for example, video slots are beginning to spread beyond casinos into local neighborhoods. There are now some 12,000 video slot machines at so-called lottery delis in the state of Oregon, and more than 20,000 video gaming terminals at bars, taverns, restaurants, truck stops, gaming cafes, and even 2 flower shops in the state of Illinois. And finally, thanks to a 2011 U.S. Justice Department ruling, New Jersey, Delaware, and Nevada have all legalized in-state, online, internet gambling for their casinos. and other states are considering legalizing internet gambling as well. In short, and in conclusion, the lesson across the country, and a lesson we are increasingly learning in Connecticut, is that each new expansion of legalized gambling is followed by increased pressure for still more gambling. The massive further expansion of government-sponsored gambling in Connecticut, in New England, across the nation, is a daunting prospect for those who think we already have enough of it. In fact, for me, the whole remarkable story of casinos in Connecticut was enough to want to write a book. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. And Prue has asked me to answer questions. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions I possibly can for anyone. Yes, sir.
When I went to one of the first meetings, they were talking about investors, and I'm sure that, you know, when you're thinking about, I hate to say this, but I think it's like giving yourself a blood transfusion from one arm to the other, moving half in between. When they're talking about investors, how much money do these investors and these companies pull out of a casino in an area? So you're talking about recirculation of money, but I'm sure not all the money is paid. The money has to get pulled out.
That's right. Well, let me give you a few examples. In Connecticut, the Mashantucket Pequot tribe, which became about a 1,000 person tribe, started with about 15 people and got up to 1,000 people. Each adult was receiving $100,000 a year in stipends, each adult. Minors were getting $100,000 trust funds. Everybody got a job who wanted a job. Free housing, free medical care, and I could go on down the list. This is this is certainly one of the most profitable businesses in America. Casinos pay back very, very rapidly. Slot machines can pay back in 6 months. A slot machine, a good successful community casino can pay back very quickly. Indeed, that's why it's so easy to get investors, because they know even if the thing begins to fall apart later, they've got their money out. And of course, this is a big problem now. I mean, what happened? Why did the casino developer pull out of Fall River, for example? We know why. He's very, very concerned about a casino in Boston, a casino in Taunton, a casino in Brockton, a casino somewhere else. So it's getting less and less easy, but nonetheless, it continues to be an enormously profitable business. The former Attorney General of Mississippi probably said it best. He said that a gambling license in America is the closest thing we have in this country to a license to steal. I didn't say that, he said that. Yes, ma'am.
I remember something about the bailout of Twin River way back when. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that was about? The bailout of Twin Rivers by the state?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
You mentioned the bailout
Yeah.
of Twin Rivers by the state.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, the state put up about $3.5 million to cover losses of the casino before it was then sold to its current owners, and the state also guaranteed losses for that casino. Yeah.
They don't talk about that.
Well, this is a new new ownership came in and bought it, but no, of course they don't talk about that. Yes, ma'am. It's a little bit hard to hear up here for me, and I just want to make sure I hear your question.
On the way over on the radio, I just happened to hear a news item that PayPal is now going to expedite payments for internet gambling. What do you think that's going to do in terms of people playing online or playing in real life?
Right. Well, that's a good question. The question, well, I don't know if you all heard it, but she's read that PayPal is about to expedite payments to casinos. I'm afraid this is what is happening everywhere now. This is what is going to, not what is happening, but what is going to happen in case after case. I mean, you know, how many of you watched a Patriots game yesterday? Well, all of us, probably, most of us, many of us. What did you see? What was the most dominant thing in the Patriots game except Tom Brady? What was the most dominant thing? Yeah, fantasy football. Fantasy football. What did they tell you? Did they tell you anywhere in any of those advertisements that it's gambling? Did they tell you that? You know why they didn't tell you that? Because here's the rule. The rule is if you can make the case that it is not luck, but it is skill, then it is legal. Well, when it was, you'd pick teams, you'd pick players for a whole season, it was a lot easier to make that argument that it was skill. When you're picking it every day, it's a lot different thing. In any event, the major leagues, whether it be the NFL, whether it be the NBA, they all want to get into this because it is potentially enormously profitable. And you know who plays these games the most? Kids, right? Kids. Everybody, you know, even if it's an adult in the house, the kids want to play. So it's a great way to begin to teach the kids how to gamble. And what do they tell you? They even tell you you could lose money? No, they say you make a deposit. You make a deposit. You could win up to $2 million. But what if you don't win it? Oh, that's right. They keep your deposit. But it's not gambling. Now, this is going to be a big issue in Massachusetts. It's going to begin in Massachusetts and elsewhere. But it is just an example of the continuing spread of easy, convenient, legalized gambling across the country. In the case of online gambling, this would put basically a casino in every house, every living room, every dorm room in the United States, on every cell phone, etc. And one of the saddest things is the casinos want it. They want it because they want to get at younger people. They got a problem. As I said, you go into a casino and go through 80% of the casino is usually slot machines. Just walk through the aisles of the slot machines. Who's there? Very few young people. They need to get to younger people. And one of the ways they want to do it is through online gambling. And that's why so many of the casinos are fighting for it. And the addiction experts are very, very concerned because they say online gambling is the most addictive of all forms. Because of the fast pace of the games, because of its 24-hour availability, you can get up at night to go to the bathroom and gamble on your way back to bed. And also because of the instant gratification aspect of online gambling. That's a very good question, and yeah, it's all part of the more gambling there is, the more pressure to open it up, until finally it will be in your local florist shop. Yes, sir.
This is slightly off the topic, but not really. What defines a Pequot? What defines a Mohegan? Most Mohegans I know are intermarried for many generations. How do they define their identity?
Yeah, very good question, and this was a big issue in Connecticut. The Mashantucket Pequots claimed that they were descended from the original Pequots, and they were supposed to go before the Bureau of Indian Affairs and prove that by proving their genealogy, proving that their tribe had been in continuous operation since historical times, etc. They weren't able to do that. So instead, they went to the Connecticut Congressional Delegation and they asked the delegation to put a bill into Congress that would legislatively give them federal recognition so they'd be eligible to open a casino. The bill was passed in Congress thanks to the Connecticut delegation. Ronald Reagan was president at the time and he vetoed the bill because basically he thought it was a scam. But the tribe and its lawyers then went back to the Connecticut delegation and said, look what this terrible president has done in vetoing this bill. And the Connecticut delegation went around, rounded enough votes up to override President Reagan's veto. And Reagan at that point threw in the towel, said, look, go back and pass the bill again, I'll sign it, and we'll throw in $900,000 so you can begin to buy up land around your reservation. In the case of the Mohegans, they had much more claim on being a federally recognized tribe, and that they had a bigger tribe. They actually had a small church that had kept some of their culture going, and they were able to get federal recognition through the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
That's interesting. I don't know how many blonde Mohegans I know, but there were quite a few.
Yes, sir.
In Rhode Island, and I'm sure it's true in other places, I assume it is, in order for a casino to come into a community, the community has to vote in favor.
Yeah.
So that means that all of these casinos in these communities, that the people have wanted them. What do you make out of that?
I make out of it exactly what I said, and that is that it's a David and Goliath fight. The casinos have all the money in the world. As I said in Brockton, they outspent the opponents 450 to 1. In Massachusetts, they ran 4,000 television ads in the last month. Every political campaign depends on publicity. It depends on talking to the voters. Usually, I mean, let's talk about here in Tiverton. What kind of organization is there here in Tiverton to tell the other side of the story? How much money has people against casinos raised to tell the other side of the story? You can be sure that the casino developers have all the money in the world to spend on this. This is simply part of their marketing budget. So when you say that people, in fact, where there have been really strong campaigns, Tewksbury, Massachusetts, East Boston, Massachusetts, Palmer, Massachusetts, West Springfield, Massachusetts, Newport, Rhode Island, casinos have been defeated. But it's a good question, it's a fair question, and I think that's the answer. Yes, ma'am.
Well, don't they lie? I mean, really, the jobs that they're talking about, what good are $8 an hour jobs? Are they actually good paying jobs that they're offering? Because that seems to be like the second, most positive aspect of the thing that they throw out there.
Right.
But really, isn't that like a Walmart job where, it's not really an affordable living wage, therefore they have those people go to the state for, medical and dental and et cetera. So the state has to pay what the casino won't pay.
The jobs for card dealers in Connecticut pay perhaps $6 an hour plus tips. Right? Plus tips. And the tips can bring it anywhere to, let's say, to $18 an hour.
So minimum wage doesn't apply?
This is for card dealers, that is the situation. Now, most of the jobs are low-paying service jobs because they're people who clean up, who are restaurant workers, who are et cetera, et cetera. Now, being a good poker dealer is a skilled job, and that requires obviously a higher compensation. But what has happened, the big thing that has happened now is, and this is happening all over the country, is that the casinos, when they start with full-time jobs, but they quickly go to part-time jobs. As I say, to reduce overall wage costs and to get rid of medical benefits. And this is happening all over the country. I've done a great deal of research on this, talked to casino people all over the country, and it's one of the great changes that has happened to the casino industry in recent years. So what they'll tell you is, well, we're going to start with this many full-time jobs. The other thing they're big at is telling you how many construction jobs they're going to bring in. Look, construction jobs are important. There's no question about that. But a construction job lasts for a year or a year and a half. Do you want to bet your community's entire future based on a job that's going to last for a year or a year and a half? The other thing is, when this starts down, imagine what happened in Connecticut when they were hiring Oh, this is great. We're hiring, we're hiring, hiring. They just published in Connecticut the unemployment statistics for our 8 counties in Connecticut. There's only one county that's losing jobs in Connecticut, New London County. When it starts down, it's an enormous pressure on the community. When it started down, now that it started down in Atlantic City, for example, enormous pressure on the social agencies in the community. Enormous pressure on the social agencies in eastern Connecticut. In Atlantic City, last August, the city council in Atlantic City began debating an increase in property taxes. And the first proposal is for a 28% increase in property taxes in Atlantic City. So that's what happens they're great telling you when it's all good. But if you look at what is happening in the country, why does anybody think it's going to be any different here than it is in Connecticut or anywhere else? Maybe not next year or the year after. Supposedly you're here for the long haul. Yes, ma'am.
I heard this statistic, I can't say it tonight, statistic, that out of all the addictions, that's alcohol, drugs, whatever, that there are more suicides connected with gambling than any other. Have you heard that?
Yes, according to the research of all the addictions, gambling has the highest ratio of leading to suicides. And we've certainly had our share in eastern Connecticut. Yeah. Well, yes, sir.
You said that miraculously the Pequods came along. Well, the Pequods, the entire tribe was supposedly wiped out during King Philip's War. And so anyone who came, these people who claim to be the descendants of the Pequod, probably, or maybe 3 or 4 of them escaped into the woods. But the Pequod tribe was wiped out during King Philip's War. So these people are phonies.
It's true. It was wiped out as a tribe, and the Connecticut, state of Connecticut, the colony of Connecticut at the time, declared the Pequot tribe dispersed and no longer existed. But many Pequots survived, and several of them, many of them, began to recollect in 3 different communities. And over time, they got 2 different reservations. So that, what you say is true, but also what I've just explained is true. Let me tell you just one thing about how you qualify as a Mashantucket Pequot. You have to show that somebody living on the reservation back in 1900 or 1910 census, somebody living, you are related to somebody living on that reservation. That is the rule. In Connecticut, in 1961, there were so few people who could demonstrate that they were genealogically connected to true Indians that the tribes, the 5 tribes, went to the state of Connecticut and asked that a law be changed. The law at that time said that you had to be able to show you had 1/8 quantum Indian blood to qualify to be an Indian and for whatever small benefits you might receive or to be in a tribe. The tribes asked the legislature to change that rule because they said in a few years no one will qualify to be 1/8. So the legislature in its wisdom said, well, we could make it 1/16 or we could make it 1/32 or we could make it 1/64, but why bother? Why not just eliminate the blood quantum rule? And instead the legislature passed a law and said it was up to the individual tribe to set its own requirements as to who was a member of the tribe, who could become a member of the tribe. So that's the regulation that the Mashantucket Pequots set. But technically, if it were my tribe, I could require that you have to prove that you were at least 1/32 Norwegian to be in my tribe. I could set whatever requirements I want. There was one more question I had, I know, over here. Yes, sir.
Could you say a little bit about the role of the gaming industry in the establishing of the two very large casinos?
In Connecticut?
In other words, the big players, did the tribe hire outside gaming experts to build these huge casinos?
Yes, when the tribes opened the casino, before they opened the casinos, they hired professional people from the casino industry around the country, especially New Jersey. The first president was actually from New Jersey. Yes, and the idea was hopefully those professionals would train local tribal members to some extent that happened. But yes, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Well, I'd like to, yes, ma'am.
One quick
Yeah.
question. If you could underscore maybe one sentence in this book that would kind of dissuade Tiverton from going this way, where would you look in this book?
In this book, I would read the last chapter, not the epilogue, although the epilogue will give you a lot of the facts, but the last chapter will give you the end of the story. And on that point, I'd like to close by saying that many people have asked me why I wrote the book as a novel instead of a nonfiction book. And the answer is we've already had 3 very good nonfiction books on the rise of foxwoods, which was a major national story when it happened. Those books are now 11, 12, 13 years old, but they're very good books. As I would tell the story to visitors to my home in eastern Connecticut, I would always ask, how'd these casinos get here? And I would tell the story, and then I would tell the story a second time, a third time, and a fourth time. And I realized that except people in the immediate area, even people in eastern Connecticut didn't really know the story, what had happened. And by the time I got to Hartford, almost nobody really knew the story. And by the time I got to Providence, nobody knew the story, or to Boston, or to Syracuse, or whatever it may be. And I thought, this is a story that needs to be told. How do I tell it? And I thought that if instead of writing, I know I talked about a lot of statistics tonight, but I did because I'm talking about the background. I thought if I could write an exciting novel set against the factual background of what happened in Connecticut, I could reach a much larger audience. I could put a human face on what it is for a casino to come to a community. You know, people love a good story. They get much more interested and involved in a good story and care about the characters and care about what happened. And that's what I wanted to try to accomplish, to put a human face on it. And I think literature traditionally has been often has been effective in dealing with social issues and social problems. You know, I hope even a little bit that I've succeeded in doing that. The book is it's just gone into its second printing. I am speaking now all over the Northeast. I think this is a matter of education. To this gentleman's question, people just don't know the other side of the story. They know the casino side of the story. In any event, I appreciate the opportunity to come here. Prue asked me to bring some books. I did bring some books. I'd be happy to sign one for anybody who would like one. Be happy to answer some more questions. And I thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot. Thank you.